Today I want to talk about something that is more of a personal irritant to me. Um, I like intelligent conversations. I like reading books, with people who have, genuine, they put actual thought behind, what they wrote. Even when I don't agree with them, I still enjoy, where people actually put forth thought. Here, a great example of this is the book series Dune. Frank Herbert was very much so, anti Jesus and Christianity and stuff, and it came across in a lot of his writing. And I don't obviously agree with his conclusions. Um, I'm a Christian, but I appreciate the intellectual challenge that Dune presents. I appreciate, just the thought that went into it, and that's one of my biggest complaints. Is a lot of times when you're talking with people who are anti-Bible or atheists or irreligious people, a lot of the conversations that are brought up are just so shallow and hollow, and there's been like no real thought to it. And that's actually why I named this video "Contradictions in the Bible: A Convenient Lie," because a lot of people look for what they want to find in the Bible, and then when they find it, they're like, "Aha!" But the Bible is a book that you can literally jerk out of context and make it say anything you want. It's so big and it has so many different things that it talks about. It's just not real hard if you ignore the context to make it say really anything that you want. And it's not the only book that you can do this with, but it's the most common because it's kind of like the symbol of Western religion, I guess. It's just kind of one of those um, you know, I don't know if hallmark is the right word, but one of those, symbols. So, a lot of religious people don't put much thought into their beliefs, just very shallow beliefs, just kind of going along with it. They dismiss anything that doesn't have an instant resolution, like, oh, well, that doesn't make sense because isn't that kind of like, oh, wait, no, and they're just completely blind themselves to anything. Well, I don't know exactly what that means, but I know that the Bible can't possibly be wrong, so I'm just not even going to put any thought into it. Like, I don't know, almost like they're afraid to admit to God that they might have a doubt about something, or maybe they're just concerned that if they, study something out, that their beliefs will crumble around them or something. I don't know. I don't know. They just, there's a lot of dismissing, Um, don't put much thought into it. If I don't have an instant answer to it, well, the Bible just says it, and so I believe it. Well, I'm obviously not saying that it's that you shouldn't believe in the Bible, but you should definitely put thought into the things that you believe. And if the Bible can't stand up to intense scrutiny after the thousands of years that it's already existed, what are the chances? So instead of just ignoring things, it just doesn't really seem very helpful. Um, Religious people kind of give off this idea that they're outdated. The blind faith that there's no reasonable, uh, there's no persuasive reason to believe in faith. Everything that we believe is just a hope. There's no evidence or proof of any of it. That religious people are irrational, that they're haters of knowledge. And unfortunately, a lot of the religious people that I know are like that. And it doesn't help that there's a lot of people like Kenneth Copeland and stuff who take advantage of the poor and who kind of just abuse their authority. And just then there's the whole Westboro Baptist and that whole there's just a lot of different bad things going on with people who claim to be Christian. I would personally disagree with whether they are Christians or not, but that's off the topic. And the thing about that religious people have to remember is that passion doesn't make it true. Being passionate about something doesn't make it true. But the opposite is also true. Many find something that they don't like or don't understand, so they look just long enough to hear contradiction, and then they're like, ah, yes. You see people do this all the time. Well, I was unsure about this, so I did a quick Google search, and after my whole 15 minutes of study, intense study, how much can you possibly study? It's a contradiction, and yeah. Like, there's this one website, which I think I'm going to systematically go through and give a rebuttal for all their arguments, and I believe it's called Contradictions in the Torah. I believe that's what it's called, and obviously, as the name suggests, the guy just goes through different things in the Torah, trying to talk about contradictions, and one thing that he brought up is the idea of, it's called JEDP, that the Old Testament law wasn't written in its original form as we have it now. It was actually, these four different groups that had their own traditions, and then it just kind of got sandwiched together into one unit, which is our Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. That view was very popular about 2 generations of scholars ago. And modern scholarship really doesn't consider it as accurate, for many reasons. First off, the supposed breaks aren't where you'd expect them to be. It's too easy to explain the cohesion of the books. There's no evidence whatsoever of there being 4 separate documents. Those are just a handful of easy retorts. But still, you see people go to this website and they say, "Oh, see, now that just makes sense." And pastors, they're afraid to talk about this. No, it's not that. Well, maybe some pastors are afraid to talk about it. I'm not afraid to talk about it. I just don't waste time on theories that are proven untrue. There's no reason to give credence to a theory that's old and outdated. I mean, that would be like the original form of evolution that was originally hypothesized. If I put forth all my energy into rebutting that form, rebutting. Anyways, contradicting that form of evolution, it wouldn't really do much good, because evolution as a theory has evolved. It's changed. They don't view it the same as it did at its original conception. So it would be mostly unhelpful. They have a bad experience with fake religious people and assume they are all the same because that's all they've ever experienced. So then they just kind of take it out on the Bible. The idea that we can just dismiss the Bible because of a contradiction is so convenient. No search for real answers is even necessary anymore. Oh, it doesn't matter that, I'm ignoring history or the genre of the book or, all these different things. That makes it doesn't matter that I'm doing shoddy scholarship and I'm really jerking things out of context to prove my point. None of that matters, as long as I can come to the conclusion that the Bible is full of contradictions. And that's what I have a problem with. It's like there's this really famous atheist, his name's Hutchins, I believe, and he has so many of his arguments that really sound good unless you just sit and think about it, and then you realize, this theory doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. But people will, Hutchins, man, he was a Hutchins. It's like he got offended by a Christian, and so he used up all of his energy to come up with one-liners that were like, it's like Richard Dawkins, and another one that was really held up is, they make atheism seem like a child's theory. Atheism has some really good points that, a lot more reasonable and level-headed people have discussed. But then you have people like Hutchins and Dawkins, and it just makes it a laughingstock. I mean, just the only people that Richard Dawkins and Hutchins relate to are just people who don't do a whole lot of thinking. And it's like pop culture atheism. Pop culture atheism. It's not really. It's like, here's a good example. It's like pop music. It's not really music, but it applies to them. It makes the masses happy. No matter what garbage you produce, it's peppy, and so they like it. It's the exact same thing with Richard Dawkins and Hutchins. It's just it's pop atheism. They don't actually really have good points or even understand the basics of philosophy, religion, psychology. I mean, anything really. But because it appeals, then they get popular. The idea that we can just dismiss the Bible because of a contradiction is just so convenient. No search for answers is even necessary anymore. But much like the religious people, I could easily just say this: passion doesn't make it true. Just because you're passionate in your belief that the Bible is full of contradictions doesn't mean that it actually is. The law, which once again the first 5 books of the Bible are called the law: Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. The law make it clear that Israel didn't have anything to eat when they were in the wilderness. It makes it very, very clear. I think it says it 3 or 4 different times. So if there's anything we know, it's that they needed food. Okay, all right. Well, then it also makes it clear that they had herds. They had cows and stuff, or sheep, that kind of stuff. And so then the modern person without any knowledge of shepherding, or the ancient world, can easily go to that and say, well, which is it? Did they have food or didn't they have food? See, this is a contradiction to modern Americans and modern Europeans, but not really a contradiction. This is more, it seems like a contradiction because of our modern ignorance to how the world works. If a farmer ran out of food, he had nothing to eat, but he still had the seeds to plant the next year's crops, would he say that he ran out of food? Yes. Those seeds aren't for eating, they're for planting. It's very, very important that he has something to plant for the next season. When you harvest, you don't eat it all. You have to plan for the future. You have to plan for the next harvest. Are you increasing the crop size? There's a lot of different things to think about. Modern people don't really get that because, well, by and large, modern people don't know a whole lot. I was actually getting in an argument about abortion, and they mentioned the way that we eat eggs, which is raw. I mean, not raw. Pre-born chickens, and I said, it's only a baby chicken if the rooster has impregnated that egg. And that was like mind-blowing for them. They didn't understand the concept that the egg was just an egg. Without the sperm, it doesn't work. That's like taking a bunch of flour and saying, I have a cake. No, you have something that could be a part of a cake. Same kind of concept. Anyways, so this isn't really a contradiction. They lived off their animals. Those animals were extremely important for their survival. They were shepherds. Shepherds don't just go and raise meat animals and eat them all. I mean, they actually didn't eat meat all that often. I mean, yes, they would have meat, but not like for every single meal. They couldn't just go to Walmart and pick up meat in the section there. I mean, there was thought that had to be put into what they were eating. What am I saying here? So they lived off their animals. If they ate them all, they would have been ruined. Yes, they could have eaten their all of their animals. That's absolutely true. They could have. But that would be the same as saying you could take all the money from your savings account and liquidate all your assets and spend all that money. You'd be ruined. Like, how would you possibly pay the next month's rent or mortgage or whatever you pay? And not only that, but it's a very short-sighted solution. Yes, I mean, hypothetically, they could have done that. That is true. But for their minds, they wouldn't have even thought about that because it'd be so wasteful, and it would have completely screwed them in the desert. And so this brings up a very important point. Well, didn't they do animal sacrifices? Yes. And that's actually one of the big points, is that sacrificing was an actual sacrifice for them. It was a sacrifice to give up that animal to God. Which is why in a lot of the sacrifices, God actually permitted them to eat some of the meat. In fact, in a lot of the sacrifices, either it was given to the priest or the people themselves shared it with the priest or different stuff like that. Not a whole lot of the sacrifices involved burning everything. Let's see. So then people say, well, what about like, for instance, drinking the milk from the cows? Well, the thing is, cows don't naturally just produce milk, right? They get pregnant, they give birth to a baby calf, and then they produce milk. Now, how we do it at dairy farms, if you want to say that, dairy ranches, whatever, is that's not really a natural pattern. See, the milk produces for about, I think it's like 2 years, and then they have to inseminate the cow again. Now, see, the problem is that puts a lot of strain on the cow, and it's not really how you're supposed to do it, but because there's such a demand for milk, that's kind of how you have to do it. Well, see, it's kind of similar with when you're walking through the desert. Why? First off, it is very unlikely that they would have been breeding their animals while they were traveling. That's a terrible mistake. I find it very unlikely that they'd have been like, we're walking into the desert, let's breed our animals. What? So they probably didn't have that many young animals around at the time. They probably would have only done the necessity breeding. Like, for instance, when after I think it was 3 years or something, they went to the promised land. God said they didn't believe, and so they didn't enter. So God said, okay, you have to go live in the desert for 40 years. Then they were probably, because they weren't really moving around a whole lot, they were probably at that time doing breeding to keep the flocks up. But obviously they didn't give us a record of their breeding patterns. Duh. But it is unlikely that they would have been breeding while traveling, and animals don't do good under stress. They really do not do good under stress. When you move a chicken, here's a good example. When a chicken is in an unfamiliar environment, you move it, you change something in their coop. It gets too hot when it hasn't been hot, and then all of a sudden you have like a heat wave. Chickens will actually stop producing their eggs. The environment determines a lot of how much a chicken produces, and if a chicken is stressed, it can't produce. The same is true for a cow. If a cow gets stressed out, it will stop producing milk. This is something that I feel like people, once again, in the modern world, they don't understand. Animals are very temperamental, and they're not machines. And once again, back in the day, they didn't have a lot of the breeds of stuff that we do now, anyways, which might be a moot point. So I'll just move on past it. So rather than understanding the 3,000-year gap between us and them, the history, any history really, how to interpret history, how to look at history, people who have no idea about history making such grand conclusions about history. Well, I've never studied history. I have no idea of how they wrote back then, how they thought back then, but I know everything about history because I read the Bible and saw something that I thought was a contradiction. For real. Anyways, without understanding the context, the people, the convenient lie is preferred over the inconvenient truth. There are many resources available for you, Norman Geisler, for instance, and although they may, not all of them are true about every single instant, not everything that those answer books give 100% is going to be accurate. In fact, some of them even say that. We're not quite sure, but here's an answer, here's an answer, here's an answer. As time goes on, we'll know more. And the truth is, we don't have full knowledge about history, so there is that. But many of them do have very good answers and explanations that make more sense than what people are advocating for with the Bible having contradictions. And you might say, how could that make more sense? And here's just a real quick. So what we're saying, and we're saying that this makes more sense than saying that there are answers out there. No, this makes more sense. The editors missed such obvious mistakes and contradictions, and then all of Israel up to the present day was so stupid that they couldn't figure out that there were things that needed a second thought in their book. Really? That's what you think? You think you're so much smarter than thousands of years of people. Your thought of what might be a contradiction has surely dumbfounded thousands of years of belief. Yes, absolutely. Like, how arrogant can you get? Arrogance is so arrogant to assume that modern humanity is smarter intellectually. Oh, well, aren't they? No, actually, no. We know more about scientific things, but many high schoolers don't even know how to spell, or about the Holocaust. They knew how to survive. Modern people would die in the woods. We have a lot of information, but aren't very knowledgeable. See, we live in an age where people have knowledge at their fingertips that they just simply don't know. And so then what they do is they get an argument and they do a Google search, and then they find the answer that supports what they want to believe, and then they say, oh, we'll see. And it's on the internet, and everything on the internet is true. We have a lot of information but aren't very knowledgeable. Oh, I did a Google search. I know all these things, and I can absolutely prove that the Bible is full of contradictions because of my very limited historical understanding. Or this is another one of my favorites. I read one book about, or I read a couple books about it from skeptics who very much so had faulty reasoning, and because it's in a book, that means that it's just fact. Okay. Excuse me. We have a lot of, I already said that. It's so arrogant to assume that they were morons, and we are so smart that we can easily see the errors that thousands saw. And remember, others saw it before you. But they believe that there are explanations for that. A great example of this is the Gospels. The Gospels were 4 books, and they said, hey, not every single detail is absolutely 100%. It's written from the same perspective, from the same person. What's going on here? And so there was a person who actually tried to take the 4 Gospels and make it into one book and kind of take out all the mistakes. And the church said, no. And they actually opted for it staying into 4 different books. And the reason for that, because they felt like it wasn't contradictions. They felt like it was different viewpoints, and I can't go, and I'm running out of time, so I kind of got to stop there. But my point being, they decided to keep it as 4 books instead of trying to get rid of the errors. Not because they didn't see things that you had to stop and think about for a second, rather than just having an easy, dumbed-down answer, but because they saw the value of the 4 separate books. So, and the last thing, and I'm really running out of time, my timer's about to go off. One last thing that's worth mentioning about history. I love history. History is just so great. I think everybody should learn how to study history, how to interpret history, really get an idea of history for themselves rather than having just some professor tell them about how history works. I mean, really, I love college and all that stuff. I'm not saying anything about that, but really, study history for yourself. But I will say this, my final comment here. You must understand history before you can comment on it. I think that that's an absolute essential, absolute necessity. But anyways, so do I believe that there's contradictions in the Bible? No, I do not. I feel like people look for an easy solution, and that one fits the bill. Bye!